Okay, so when you think of St. Patrick, you probably think of parades, maybe some green rivers, right? But the real story behind the man is way more incredible. It's about a life that got completely flipped on its head, and it starts in a way you would never, ever expect. So that brings us to the big question. How on earth does a teenager, kidnapped and forced into slavery, end up becoming the greatest hero of the very country that captured him? It's an absolutely wild story of survival, faith, and just unbelievable courage. To really understand the legend, we've got to go back to the beginning, when he was just a kid. And his story doesn't even start in Ireland. It starts across the sea in Roman Britain, where he was living a pretty comfortable life, a life that was about to be torn apart. So, Patrick was born way back in the late 4th century. His dad was a local official, so things were pretty good for him. But then, when he was just 16, everything changed. Irish raiders attacked his home, captured him, and dragged him across the sea to be sold as a slave in Ireland. Just like that, his old life was gone. For 6 years. Let that sink in. For 6 years, he was a slave. His job was to be a shepherd, all alone, out on the hills, totally cut off from everything and everyone he'd ever known. I mean, 6 years is a long time for anyone, but for a teenager, that's an eternity. But here's the twist. All that suffering and loneliness, it actually became his education. During those long years, he learned to speak fluent Irish. He learned all about the culture of the people who held him captive. And out there in the quiet, he found a really powerful sense of faith that would basically guide the rest of his life. After those 6 long years, Patrick's story takes another huge turn. See, he doesn't just accept his fate. He decides to rewrite it. This leads to a super daring escape, and then a vision that would send him on the most unexpected path you can imagine, a path leading right back to Ireland. He walked over 200 miles just to get to the coast. Can you even imagine that? Running from your master, sneaking through a country you barely know, with absolutely no idea what you'll find when you get there. It was just a pure act of desperation and incredible bravery. And he made it. He actually made it. He found a ship, somehow convinced the sailors to let him on, and eventually he got back home to Britain. His family was ecstatic. They thought he was dead. They begged him, please, never leave us again. And for a little while, it looked like that was the end of the story. But it wasn't. Patrick started having these really intense dreams. In one, he saw a letter that said, "The voice of the Irish." And then he heard them, the voices of the very people from the place where he was a slave. And they were calling out to him, saying, "Come and walk among us once more." You know, that calling changed everything. He decided he had to go back to Ireland, not for revenge, not for anger, but on a mission to share his faith with the same people who had enslaved him. But first he knew he had to get ready. And this wasn't some quick decision. No way. He spent more than 15 years studying in what's now France. He even had to deal with church leaders who didn't think he was smart enough for the job. But he kept at it. And eventually he became a bishop. And around the year 432, he finally sailed back to Ireland. Now, to get what a huge challenge this was, you have to know about the Druids. These guys weren't just priests. They were the judges, the doctors, the spiritual leaders, and the top advisors to all the local kings. They held all the power. And they were the ones Patrick was about to go up against. The Ireland he came back to wasn't one single country. It was more like a patchwork quilt of little independent kingdoms. Each one had its own king and its own ancient traditions. It was a really complex and, honestly, a pretty dangerous place for an outsider to just show up. So how did he pull it off? How did this one guy manage to win over an entire nation of really fierce independent people? Well, the answer is in his strategy, which was totally brilliant and, surprisingly, very respectful. See, he didn't show up like a conqueror. He was much smarter than that. First, he went straight for the local kings to get their support. He could speak their language, which was huge. He used simple symbols they'd recognize. And this is the really clever part. He didn't try to erase their traditions. He found ways to blend them with his new ideas. There's this one famous story that shows you how bold he was. The High King of Ireland had a strict rule. During a big festival, nobody could light a fire before the king lit his. So what does Patrick do? He goes to a nearby hill and lights a giant bonfire to celebrate Easter, right in the king's line of sight. It was a total public challenge to the most powerful man in the country. Now, you'd think this would end very badly for Patrick. But it didn't. Instead of having him arrested, the king and the other leaders were actually impressed. They were blown away by his guts. That one move earned him more respect than years of playing it safe ever could have. Okay, so one of the toughest ideas Patrick had to explain was the concept of the Trinity. This idea that God is three different persons, but also one single being. It's a lot. So how do you explain something that abstract to people who've never heard anything like it? He used a shamrock. This is the legend everyone knows and loves. He just bent down, picked up this little plant that was everywhere, and used its 3 leaves on one stem as the perfect, simple visual for the idea of 3 in 1. It was genius, because it used something they saw every single day. So, Patrick's mission was a massive success. But his real impact, his legacy, went so much deeper than just religion. He literally changed the course of Ireland's future. Look at this. He didn't just set up churches. He started schools and monasteries that turned Ireland into a major center for learning in Europe. He trained local Irish people to be priests and leaders. He encouraged women to have roles in the church. And he even helped save ancient Irish stories by introducing writing on a wide scale. And you know, the coolest thing is we know what he was thinking, because he wrote it all down. Towards the end of his life, he wrote a book called The Confessio, which is basically his autobiography. In it, he tells his story, defends what he did, and you can just feel his genuine love for the Irish people. It's amazing that we still have it. So when you boil it all down, his legacy is huge. Yeah, there was a religious change, for sure. But there was also this massive leap forward in education, and he played a key role in preserving Irish culture. He didn't replace what was there. He built on top of it. I mean, what a story. Patrick's life is this incredible lesson in turning pain into purpose. He went back to the country where he was held captive, not with a sword, but with a mission to help. So it really leaves you with a big question, doesn't it? What does his story teach us about what it really takes to change the world? Not with force, but with understanding and a whole lot of courage.